Reaganism, 1980 to 1988, by Kabir Takral, Richard Liu, and Bobby Knuckles. After the Carter presidency, the conservatives found an opportunity to insert their party's belief in the federal government. In the 1980 presidential election, Ronald Reagan was selected to be the Republican nominee for the presidency. He was part of a new conservative group called the New Right Movement. He was part of the moral majority, which included evangelical Christians and moralists. Reagan championed the common man and made clear his disdain for big government. He was against affirmative action, bureaucracy, and big government Democratic Party intervention. Reagan was firmly anti-Soviet and opposed welfare programs. In the election, Reagan battled Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts. Reagan and Kennedy battled in the primaries, but Kennedy's chances of election were severely hampered by a car accident scandal in which a young woman drowned after Kennedy's vehicle drove off a bridge. The major issues in the election included high inflation and interest rates, as well as an overall declining economy. Reagan won with 51% of the popular vote and 489 electoral votes. Reagan's inauguration day proved fateful as the Iranian hostage crisis ended on that day. Reagan was hell-bent on destroying the welfare state and sought to enforce new conservatism wherever he could. His first task was readjusting the behemoth federal budget. Reagan was a strong proponent of freer markets and found support in British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The Anglo-American friendship was mutually beneficial in an anti-Soviet foreign policy and shrinking government. The federal budget prior to Reagan's administration was shifting from defense programs to Social Security and Medicare. Reagan cut $35 billion off the federal budget by cutting the social programs. Reagan was able to pass through this legislation by wooing bull weevils from the Democratic Party. The bull weevils were Southern conservative Democrats who switched parties and supported Reagan. Reagan's economic policies became known as Reaganomics. Reaganomics, supply-side economics, consisted of balancing the budget and tax reductions to boost interest in investments and economic growth, as well as reducing the federal deficit. While the economy initially faltered, including an 11% unemployment rate in 1982 and the near crash of the automotive industry, Reaganomics eventually improved the economy. While the economy improved, not everyone benefited. The inequality gap grew larger. While the economic growth of the working class stagnated, the rich became richer. Yuppies, or young urban professionals, many working on Wall Street and living lavish lifestyles, became symbols of the new economy. Oliver Stone's 1987 film Wall Street and his title character, Gordon Gekko, reflected the new era's motto. The true driving force behind Reaganomics, though, was excessive military spending. Reagan handed over $2 trillion to the Pentagon during his administration, as the federal budget deficit continued to grow. This in turn led to high interest rates, high inflation, and a volatile economy. The American international trade deficit reached record highs, and America became the #1 borrower in the world.
Ronald Reagan, originally against negotiations with the Soviet Union, became one of the foremost brokers of peace with the European giant. However, he started off on the wrong foot when he announced his interest in SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars. Basically, it was an initiative that involved having lasers in space ready to blast different enemies and protect American cities with astrodomes. This plan was shot down by both scientists and world leaders alike. Relations soon became even more tense with the Soviet Union when the Russians blasted a Korean passenger airplane that had violated Soviet airspace. Soviet-American talks would be held off for a few years. Reagan soon became caught up in the Middle East when he sent American troops to Lebanon in 1983, but soon pulled back after attacks on his own troops led to deaths of 200 Marines. He shifted his view to Central America, where Sandinistas had control in Nicaragua. Reagan was elected in 1984 with his Morning in America slogan, winning with 525 electoral votes. Reagan met his match in Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev's two revolutionary policies, glasnost or openness, and perestroika or restructuring, ushered in a new era for the Soviets. Glasnost aimed to improve civil liberties such as free speech, and perestroika was established to resuscitate the Soviet economy by going free market. However, in order to save the economy, Gorbachev needed to shrink his nation's military and was able to do so when Reagan agreed to sign the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, banning all INF from Europe. One of Reagan's toughest challenges was overcoming the Iran-Contra affair. The Iran-Contra affair involved American diplomats quietly giving Iran several arms and Iran releasing American hostages. However, Iran also gave the Contras in Nicaragua many of their arms. This violated Reagan's personal standards as well as the congressional ban on military aid to rebels. Reagan's reputation took a hit, but he remains one of the most popular presidents ever. The moral majority were a group of evangelical Christians, also known as the religious right. Their main promoters were televangelists who spread their message through the medium of cable TV. The religious right stressed anti-abortion, traditionalism, and anti-welfare.
Reagan was one of the few presidents who benefited from appointing a near majority of the Supreme Court justices. His most notable appointee was Sandra Day O'Connor, the first female to become a Supreme Court justice in the history of the court. The new conservative court went against precedent when it overturned a number of affirmative action cases. In 1989, the outcome of two court cases made reverse discrimination against whites much easier to claim and in some ways hampered the accomplishments of the civil rights movement. In Webster v. Reproductive Health Services, the court imposed certain restrictions on abortion. In 1992, the court's ruling on Planned Parenthood v. Casey that the states had the power to restrict access to abortions, as long as an undue burden was not placed on the woman. This meaning was generally vague, which benefited the states. Overall, Reagan can best be classified as a highly influential leader. Reaganomics, a major part of his legacy, helped improve the economy but widened the inequality gap and greatly assisted Wall Street in becoming the power it is today. In terms of foreign policy, Reagan showed signs of brilliance in his talks with the Soviet Union, but had several missteps in the Middle East. However, Reagan's enormous popularity overshadowed some of his scandals, and he remains a respected figure in American history.